Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Kuf Pei Gimel Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on the very bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch on Kuf Pei Beis Amid Beis, Siman Shin Lamed Zayin Sif Beis. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanasunim Batzara Ubashivya. Ha'imde bein bayom ubein bayabasha hamakom yirachem aleihem v'yitziam yitzar l'rvacha me'afela la'ira u'miyishiva l'geula hashta bagolo v'zman kariv v'nemar amen. Our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Esther Fradel bas Chana Meshemer bas ben Esther Fradel Yitzchak ben Tzion ben Dusha Rivka bas Shiraleah Chava Hadassah bas Serel Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malkichana Gila Shifra bas Ilana Udal. They should all have a refuah shalema b'saych shar Chayla Yisrael, and we are mispal that b'schus the limud HaTorah of Klal Yisrael, the Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over every member of Klal Yisrael b'chol makom shahem. So we have a very interesting sif today, very much negeya halacha l'maisa. Sif Beis says the mechaber, Asur lechabed habayis. You're not allowed to sweep the house. Now, don't get into a tizzy. Well, we're going to see when it's asur, when it's mutter. But the mechaber says, asur lechabed habayis, there is an isser derabanan, you're not allowed to sweep the house. Ela imkein hakarka merutzaf. Let's remember that, as we've mentioned many times, the houses back in the day had earthen floors. Says the mechaber, there's an isser derabanan, you're not allowed to sweep the house. Ela imkein hakarka merutzaf. Unless there's some kind of stone block, stone tiles, or even wooden beams covering the earthen floor. If the earthen floor is covered, then the Mechaber says here in the Deir Rishona, in the first opinion, you would be allowed to sweep the floor. Continues the Mechaber, V'yesh matirin afilu einem merutzef. And you should know, says the Mechaber, there are those that are matir sweeping the floor, even if the floor is not covered. All right, now we're going to dive into the Mishnah Berurah. And let's understand what the potential problems of sweeping the floor, if it's an earthen floor, what is the problem? Now, this is, according to most Shitas, an Issa D'Rabbanan. Now, what is this Issa D'Rabbanan based on? Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the very bottom line of the Mishnah Berurah, Kuf Pei Beis Amud Beis, Mishnah Berurah is cut vav, lechabed habayis. You're not allowed to sweep the floor, the earthen floor. Now, the Mishnah Berurah is going to present us with several different possibilities of why this would be awesome. First, says the Mishnah Berurah, the mezis afar mimekaimai. The problem is that when you go ahead and you sweep an earthen floor, you're going to be moving around dirt. Mezis afar, you're moving around the dirt, mimekaimai, from its place. So you're moving it around. Okay. Now note that the Mishnah Berurah over here does not tell me what is wrong with mezis afar mimekaimai. Why is that a problem? You're moving dirt. Why is that a problem? So for that, you have to take a look down in the Shar HaTzion in Ois Cotton Gimel. So first, the Chavetz Chaim says, Tam zeh, this rationale for the Isser, that the problem is mezis afar mimekaimai, nizkar b'toisvis. Taisis on Tzadikei mentions this. V'harosh, the Rosh mentions this problem. V'oid kama poskim hanimshachem achareim. And so too, many poskim that followed after Taisvis and the Rosh. But, says the Chavetz Chaim, v'loi be'aru divreihem, but they didn't explain themselves. They used these words. They said the problem with being mechabed habayis is a problem of mezis afar mimekaimai. But they didn't say what's wrong with mezis afar mimekaimai. So, says the Chavetz Chaim, v'loi be'aru divreihem, they didn't explain themselves. Im hakavana mishum tiltul afar she'ein min hamuchan, is the problem that the dirt is muktzah. What is dirt? Dirt is muktzah machmas gufay. So, says the Mishnah Berurah, could be the problem with mezis afar mimekaimai is that you're moving dirt. Dirt is aser b'tiltul. Dirt is eina min hamuchan, aka it's muktzah, and it's muktzah machmas gufa. You're not allowed to move it. And you're not allowed to move it even tzarich b'kaimai. So even if you want to argue, well, I don't want the dirt over here, so I want to clear it away from this place so that I have a nice clean place. No, it's muktzah machmas gufay. You're not allowed to move it even tzarich b'kaimai. Ucheniskar zeh b'Mordechai u'b'Milchamas perikol hakelim b'sugya d'machpedes shel tomorrow. Indeed, says the Chavetz Chaim, we find a Mordechai, we find a Ramban in the Milchamas that says that indeed this is the problem with Mezes Offer Mimakaimai. So what's the problem? The problem is a muktzah issue. When you sweep, you're moving around dirt. Dirt is also betiltal. You're not allowed to move it around. Now, many of you might be listening to this, and you know what I'm going to say next. Everybody is used to do the math. Now, let's think about this for a second. It's true that dirt is muktzah machmas gufay, but when you sweep dirt and you move dirt with a broom, what is that called? That's not tiltal. That's not directly moving the dirt. That is a classical case, it would seem, of tiltal min hatzad. You're moving it indirectly. And it's tiltal min hatzad really l'tzarich davar muter. You're not moving it because you want to move the dirt. You're not moving it for the benefit of the dirt. You're moving it because you want a clean floor. The floor is a davar muter. So it's tiltal min hatzad l'chayra l'tzarich davar muter. Not only is it tiltal min hatzad l'tzarich davar muter, it's also, as the Bir Halacha on Kuf Pei Gimel Lamed Aleph notes, it's tiltal min hatzad l'tzarich Shabbos, which is another heter. So it's a little bit funny to go ahead and answer this because of muktzah. And indeed, the Bir Halacha over there on Kuf Pei Gimel Lamed Aleph, in the very lengthy Bir Halacha v'yesh b'achmirin afilu b'merutzav, he says over here that that's one reason why you really shouldn't be concerned about muktzah. Still to ben atzad, l'tzarich Shabbos he brings down in the name of the Achrayim. So l'chayr there's no muktzah problem here. He also brings down a Rashba. The Rashba says, muktzah? L'chayr the dirt is a graf shel rei. If you need to sweep away garbage off the floor, in other words, if we're not just talking about the dirt that's on the floor, you see, one of the problems with sweeping the floor that they bring down about muktzah is also that mixed in with the dirt, you could have nutshells, you could have chicken bones, you could have other items that are muktzah. But says the Rashba, whatever dirt you want to get rid of, l'chayra is a graf shel rei. So, again, the Mishnah Berurah brings down over here his first the first thing he brings down, the first rationale he brings down of why it should be usher to sweep the floor is mezes afar mimakaimai. In the Sharet Zion, he gives right away one example. What does this mean, mezes afar mimakaimai? He's quoting Rishonim, he's quoting a Taisus, he's quoting the Rosh, but what does it mean? What's the problem of mezes afar mimakaimai? So the first thing that the Chavetz Chaim says here in Sharet Zion, cut gimel, is muktzah. Because dirt is muktzah, you're moving the dirt, that's a problem. But we have counter-arguments to that. Graf shel rei is the Rashba's counter-argument. Another counter-argument is it's tiltal min hatzad l'tzarich Shabbos. That's another counter-argument. Okay. Then the Chavetz Chaim, weiter in this Sharet Zion, brings down another possible explanation of the problem of mezes afar mimakaimai. Oy mishum asiyas guma al yedei chafira. Maybe what the Rishonim mean when they say that you can't sweep because mezes afar mimakaimai, you're moving dirt from its place, is that when you're sweeping an earthen floor with a broom, what happens if you uproot a clump of dirt? If you sweep away a clump of dirt, you make a hole. You make a little divot in the floor. If you make a divot in the floor, you made a guma. You dug out a hole. Digging out a hole in a house, that could be a problem of boina. Now, says the Chavetz Chaim, okay, hold your horses. Maybe it's a problem of boina, but for gam bazel leka yisur daraisa, it definitely would not be boina daraisa uka brisa, like the brisa says at Tzadikei and Aleph. The ka'amar de ene elu mishum shvus, it would only be nisa derabanan. Why is it nisa derabanan? Va'atam da ene tzarich la'aguma. The person who's sweeping the floor does not want to make divots in the floor. He doesn't want to make holes in the ground, in the earthen floor of the house. Indeed, he probably doesn't want holes. The problem is that he's sweeping and he made a hole. All right, he made a hole. But it's a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. He doesn't want the hole. His intention was not to make a hole. He doesn't want the hole. He just wants to sweep the house. If he accidentally did boina, it's still a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, so it's only an issa d'Rabbanan. But that's the second possible problem that we have here of mazes afar mimikoimai. So again, we have the mechaber, you're not allowed to sweep the house. We have the Mishnah Berurah right away in the beginning of Eis Kat Vav. Why can't you sweep the house? Explanation number one, quote the Rishonim, mazes afar mimikoimai. What's the problem? Sharet Tzion, two possible problems. Possible problem number one, muktzah. Well, muktzah is certainly only an issa d'Rabbanan. Then we had the counter arguments against muktzah. Told him on Atzad L'Tzara Shabbos, graf shel rei. Second explanation of what the problem of mazes afar mimikoimai is that asiyas gumos. You're making a hole. Making a hole in the earthen floor of a house would present you with an issue of boina d'Rabbanan. Okay, now let's jump back into Mishnah Berurah Katan Vav. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. There's another possible problem with sweeping an earthen floor, and that is gam mashveh hagumos b'kibudai. We said one problem of mazes afar mimikoimai could be that you uproot a clump of dirt and you make a hole. But there's also the opposite problem, which is gam mashveh hagumos b'kibudai. When you sweep the floor, you're going to level it out. So very easily you could come to fill in holes in the earthen floor. Filling in holes in the earthen floor of a house, again, presents you with an issue of boineh d'Rabbanan. Shemismalin agumos shebabayis mea afar v'heve binyan. You're filling up the holes, and that would be boineh. Now, the Mishnah Berurah doesn't say right over here that it's an issa d'Rabbanan, but let's finish the sentence. It says the Mishnah Berurah, again, so what's the second potential problem? Mashve gumos. You're filling up holes in the earthen floor. What's the problem with that? Well, that would be boineh. You're being mashve gumos. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. V'afagav de'ena miskaven la'ashvuye gumos. You don't have kavana for ashvuye gumos. You just want to sweep the floor. Afilu hachi aser the psik ratio. But it's a psik ratio. When you take the broom and you sweep the dirt across the floor, you're going to fill in all the little divots and all the little cracks and crevices. So you're being mashve gumos. It's a psik ratio. So it's boineh. Now, if you take a look at Sharet Tzion Eis Kat Daled, this is brought down from Rashi and Daf Kuf Chav Daled Amid Beis. And then if you skip some words and you skip the brackets over here in the Sharet Tzion, he says, V'gam l'Rashi einay ela mishum shvus. But this would only be an issa d'Rabbanan. And later on in the Sharet Tzion, several lines later, he says, why would it be only binyan d'Rabbanan? The binyan klachayadhu. Because it's only klachayad. Why is it klachayad? Because if you want to fill up holes in an earthen floor, you don't go fetch your broom and sweep the floor. You get a shovel, you get a hoe, whatever gardening tool you would use to fill in holes and divots. That's not really what's done with a broom. Sweeping with a broom may have that effect, but that's not the derech of how you are mashve gumos. And therefore this hashavas gumos would also be only on issa d'Rabbanan. Okay. So far, what do we have over here? Again, just to be overly repetitive, we have the mechaber, you're not allowed to be mechaber abayis. Reason number one, mazes afar b'mikoimai. Mazes afar b'mikoimai, two potential pshatim. Muktzah or asiyas gumos, making holes. Making holes, issa d'Rabbanan. Why is it an issa d'Rabbanan? Because it's a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. You're not interested in the holes. Reason number two why it's asar lechaber abayis, says the Mishnah Berurah, being mashve gumos. When you sweep the dirt around, you're going to fill in the holes. And, says the Mishnah Berurah, it's a psik ratio that it's going to happen. But, says the Chavetz Chaim in the Sharet Tzion, it's still only an issa d'Rabbanan. Why is it an issa d'Rabbanan? Because it's boineh kalachayad. You're not doing it in a normal fashion. You're doing it kalachayad, so it would be an issa d'Rabbanan. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. V'yesh omrim, and there are those that want to say that it could be that it's not really a psik ratio, that when you sweep the floor, you're going to do ashvuye gumos. There are those that suggest, no, it's not. The Smag seems to say, at least according to the Baragoyla over here, the Smag seems to say that no, it's not necessarily a psik ratio, but the Yesh Oimim the Chayshinon Shema mitoch Tirdase lechabed or liyabes akarka yishkach v'yashra agumais b'miskaven. It could be that you're going to go ahead and you're going to do it b'kavana. So the first shot was when you sweep, it's a psik ratio that you're going to fill in holes. Okay, since it's a psik ratio that you're going to fill in holes, now we have to deal. It's a psik ratio. What you're doing is going to fill in holes. What level is it? It's only an Issa D'Rabbanan. Why? Because you're doing a klachiyad. The second shot, the smag over here, this Yesh Oimrim, says, no, it's not necessarily a psik ratio, but we don't need it to be a psik ratio. Why? Because Chazal were concerned that when you go to sweep to pretty up the floor and make the room look nice, you're actually going to have kavana to be mashvi the gumais. So we don't need it to be a psik ratio because you're doing it b'kavana, but it's still only going to be an Issa D'Rabbanan, again, because it's still klachayad. You're still doing it with a broom, so it's still klachayad, it would still be an Issa D'Rabbanan. Okay, so we've covered the base now of the beginning of Sif Beis. Aser lechabed abayis, we understand the possible reasons why. According to all the reasons that we just discussed, it's an Issa D'Rabbanan. Then the Mechaber said, on the top of Kuf Pei Gimel Amud Aleph, Ela im ken karka merutzef. According to the first opinion, you're only not allowed to sweep if it's an earthen floor. But if it's merutzef, if it's covered over, then you are allowed to sweep, according to the Deya Rishona, according to the first opinion here. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah's Kat Zayin, Ela im ken merutzef, unless the floor is covered. What is it covered with? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Bein ba'avonim ubein b'kroshim. Whether it's covered over, let's say, with patio blocks, stone patio blocks, you covered over the earthen floor, or you covered it over with wooden boards. What's the difference? Why is the Mishnah Berurah making this point that it could be either way? And in the Sharet Zion, he brings it down from the Achronim. But obviously the Chavetz Chaim felt that this is something that had to be mentioned. So it could be that there is a difference between whether you covered it over with stones or wooden boards. And that is that the stones usually have more of a gap between them than the wooden boards did. And the Mishnah Berurah is letting you know that this shita that holds that if the floor is covered, you are allowed to sweep, is true even if there are gaps between the stones. So you might think that there's a concern of being mashva gumais between the stones. Kamash Malah, no. This deo would hold that it's okay, you're allowed, as long as it's covered, you're allowed to do this. Now, why is there a heter to sweep the floor if it's covered? Well, it seems that if the floor is covered, we don't really have any of the concerns that we just spoke about. Why not? Well, as far as the muktzah are concerned, it's still true that if you're sweeping the floor, obviously there must be something on the floor that you are sweeping. If it's dirt, it's muktzah machmas gufay. If it's garbage, it's also muktzah machmas gufay. But remember the counter arguments that we had against muktzah. Tiltum and atzad l'tzar Shabbos and graf sharei. So okay, could be that this shita holds if it's covered. The shita that holds that you're allowed to sweep the floor if it's covered does away with the muktzah issue with those counter arguments. What were the other problems? Asiyas gumais, making holes, and being mashva gumais. Well, obviously, if the floor is covered over with stone, or if the floor is covered over with wooden boards, there's no longer an issue of asiyas gumais or being mashva gumais. There are no gumais. We're talking about a tiled over floor, so there are no gumais. Okay, but now we come to the Deya Shnia. Now we have a second opinion. Says the Mechaber, V'yesh matirin afilu eina merutzef. So we had the Deya Rishona, you're not allowed to sweep unless the floor is covered. And now we have a Deya Shnia. There's a Deya Shnia that says, you know what, you could sweep even if it's a bare floor. We're not concerned with this whole Isser. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Kotleches, afilu eina merutzef. What does this shita hold? Well, the Mishnah Berurah is not going to mention it, but again, we have to say that this opinion does away with the muktzah issue, with the counter arguments that we had against the muktzah issue. As far as the other issues, asiyas gumais and being mashva gumais, says the Mishnah Berurah's Kotleches, the Sfira Lahu, these opinions hold that gam bazeh eino ivadai sheyashva gumais. They dispute the idea that it's a psik resha, that you're going to be mashva gumais. that hold it's not a psik reisha, that you're going to be mashve gumais. And it's zicha davar sheidim miskaven, you have no kavanah to be mashve the gumais. V'loy gara me ributz to shari b'sif aleph. And as far as and he compares this to what we learned about yesterday, sprinkling water on the floor. We said that when you sprinkle water on the floor, you're allowed to do that on Shabbos. Why? Because it's a davar sheidim miskaven, and it's not a psik reisha. This shita also holds that sweeping, it might be mashve gumais, but it's not a psik reisha that you're going to be mashve gumais. And it's a davar sheidim miskaven. You're really not doing it to be mashve gumais. So that's why this shita holds that it's okay even if the floor is a bare earthen floor. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. V'gam l'meizes offer mimekayme gam ke lo chayish. And he's also not concerned about problem number one, meizes offer mimekayme. Now, why he's not concerned about muktzah, right? The muktzah angle of meizes offer mimekayme, we discussed already. The counter arguments against muktzah. What the Mishnah Berurah is going to address over here is why he's not concerned with asiyas gumais, being meizes offer mimekayme, removing a clump of dirt and forming a hole. When a person sweeps a floor, apparently, even when they had earthen floors, when we picture an earthen floor, I think we picture the floor of the bedroom kind of looking like the backyard, an earthen floor, topsoil. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Even when you had an earthen floor, the top layer was like sandy. It was afer tichuach. It was loose dirt. And when you sweep loose dirt, we don't really have a problem of asiyas gumos, forming holes, when we're dealing with afer tichuach. This is something that we learned about a long time ago. The problem of asiyas gumos is only when you have firm soil. So when you go ahead and you dig out, you're going to create a hole that is going to remain. But when you go into the sandbox and you push sand out of the way, that's not asiyas gumos, because it's going to collapse. So that's not called asiyas gumos. So says the Mishnah Berurah, this opinion that says this whole isser is not negeah, you're allowed to sweep even a bare earthen floor. Muktzah, not concerned with. Mashve gumos, not concerned with, because it's not a psik reisha and it's a davar sheidim miskaven. Asiyas gumos, not concerned with. Why? Because it's afer tichuach, and it's not an issue. And that doesn't present an issue of making gumos. Okay. So far we had over here, Mechaber, first opinion, you're not allowed to sweep the house unless it's covered over. Second opinion, you're allowed to do it even if it's not covered over. And now, of course, we come to the Ramah, who's going to give us the biggest chumrah of all. Now, says the Ramah, Haga, v'yesh machmirin afilu b'merutzef. We have the Torah in the name of the Re, bringing down a Taisus, Tzadikei, and Aleph, in Masechta Shabbos, and a Mordechai, and a Rabbeinu Yerucham, and a Smag, and a Sefer HaTrumas, the Trumas Hadeshen. Yesh machmirin afilu b'merutzef. There are those that are machmir, that you're not allowed to sweep the floor, even if it's covered over. You're still not allowed to sweep the floor. V'chein noyagin, and the Ramah says, and that's the minig, v'ein l'shanois, and you're not allowed to change from that minig. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Av ois cotton tes, afilu b'merutzef. We have a yesh machmirin that you're not allowed to sweep the house, even if the floor is covered over. So you don't have an earthen floor. You have ceramic tile. You're still not allowed to sweep the floor, even if it's covered over. Now, we had the counter arguments against muktzah. There's no problem of asiyas gumos. There's no problem of hashvois gumos, being mashve gumos if it's tiled over. What's the problem? Says the Mishnah Berurah's cutting test, afilu b'merutzef, bein ba'avonim, whether the floor is covered over with stones, ubein b'kroshim, or whether it's covered over with wooden boards, you're still not allowed to sweep. Why? The svira lahu, because these shitas hold, the be'ein merutzef have a psik reisha. They hold that to sweep an earthen floor is a psik reisha of being mashve gumos. So davar sheidim miskaven is not an argument. It's a psik reisha that you're being mashve gumos. Since it's a psik reisha that you're being mashve gumos, you're doing boine derabanan. You're doing boine klachayad. This is an issa derabanan. So this very machmir shita that the Ramah is bringing down, they hold that if the floor is not covered over, it's a psik reisha and it's a derabanan. Okay, but what does that have to do with a floor that is covered over? Continues the Mishnah Berurah, the gazrinon merutzef atuena merutzef, and we make a gzera. We make a gzera that you're not allowed to sweep a covered over floor, because if we allow you to sweep a covered over floor, you might come to sweep a bare earthen floor. V'ayin b'bir halacha, and then he sends us to this lengthy bir halacha v'yesh machmirin. Now, some of you might be jumping out of your chairs, and you're saying to yourselves, Gzera merutzef atu eina merutzef? Eina merutzef is only innocent rabbanon. Eina merutzef, okay, it's a psik reisha, you're going to be mashve gumais. Okay, boin the rabbanon. So it's an innocent rabbanon. So eina merutzef is an innocent rabbanon. And now you're going to be geyser merutzef atu eina merutzef? I mean, is this not a classic example of we don't make a gzera like gzera? So the Pri Megadim already addressed this. And the Pri Megadim doesn't really explain it, but the Pri Megadim says, yeah, even though it's only in the Siddur Rabbanan by Merutzef, yeah, we make a Gzeira, Merutzef, Atueina Merutzef. So says the Pri Megadim. Okay, now let's go a little weiter, and are we going to finish the Sif? No, we're not going to finish the Sif, but let's at least finish the page and go a little bit on to Kuf Pei Gimel Amid Beis in the Ramah, and then we'll talk about Halacha L'Maisa, and maybe we'll see some of this beer halacha. Says the Ramah weiter, mihu. So the Ramah just brought down this most machmir opinion that you're not allowed to sweep the floor even if it is covered over because of a gzera. Mihu, however, says the Ramah, al yidei eina Yehudi mutter. First of all, to ask an eina Yehudi to sweep the floor, that's mutter. And it's apparent from the Mishnah Berurah that it's mutter even on a bare earthen floor, not just on a covered floor. Even on a bare floor, a bare earthen floor, it's mutter to have an Eina Yehudi sweep the floor. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah's Kat Yud. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Yedei Eina Yehudi mutter. Hainu afilu b'she'eina merutzef. Even if the floor is not covered over, it's a bare earthen floor, this is still mutter al Yedei Eina Yehudi. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Daha hu eina miskaven rak lechaber abayis. Because the eina Yehudi who's sweeping the floor, he has no intent to be mash for the gumais. That's not what he's intending to do. Okay, so what? It's still a psik reisha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, va'aftu psik reisha le'inyan agumais. Even though it is a psik reisha, according to this shita, this shita, the Ramah, the very machmer opinion of the Ramah. Why is this opinion so machmer? They hold that when you sweep the house, it's a psik. When you sweep a bare earthen floor in a house, it's a psik reisha that you're going to be mash v'gumais. So it's an issa d'rabbanan. Okay, but al yidei eina Yehudi it's mutter. Why? Because the eina Yehudi, when he's sweeping, has no kavana to be mash for the gumais. V'aftu psik reisha. Still, it's a psik reisha l'inyan agumais. Still, mutter al yidei eina Yehudi. It's still mutter to have an eina Yehudi do this, and to instruct an eina Yehudi to do it. Why? The ba'amira le'eina Yehudi, when it comes to the Yisad Rabbanon of amira la'akum, loy kaptinon kulahai. We're not going to be so makbid by amira la'akum that we're going to go ahead and say that you're not allowed to tell an eina Yehudi to sweep the floor because it's a psik reisha that when he sweeps the floor, he's going to be mash v'gumais, which is going to be an Yisad Rabbanon because it's boine klachayad. No, we're not going to go so weit on Amira La'akum. We already had a case like this in Reishtun Gimel Sifei in the Ramah, Ayin Sham b'Mishnah Berurah. Over there, what it's talking about is, if it's during the winter and it's very frigid outside, we said Hakol Cholim Eitzel Tzina. We said that cold and warmth is considered a tzarich gadol. When it's very cold outside, it's considered a tzarich gadol to have the heat turned on. And we said over there that when it's cold outside, you're allowed to do Amira La'akum on a daraisa. You're allowed to do Amira La'akum to tell an eina Yehudi to light the furnace. And we said you're allowed to do it even if there's a pot of soup on top of the furnace. So when he goes ahead and he lights the fire, he's also going to cook up the soup. Now, it's a psik reisha on bishul. It's a psik reisha that he's going to be cooking the soup. And we said that that's mutter because by amir la'akum, psik reisha, we're not so makbid. Ayin sham b'Mishnah Berurah. Continues the Ramah, and the Ramah says, v'chein, and similarly, you're, even according to this more machmer opinion, you're allowed to sweep the floor al yidei beged or matlis. You're allowed to use a cloth, a garment, some kind of fabric, a matlis or a rag, a knaf avaz, or some goose feathers, hakalim, soft, lightweight goose feathers, the enoi hakalim, the enoi mashve gumais. These are items that are light, and they're not going to have the effect of being mashve gumais. So just kind of to wrap up the Ramah, and then we'll go into the Bir Halacha. The Ramah brought down a very machmer opinion. He said you're not allowed to sweep the floor, even if the floor is covered over. Why? Because these opinions hold that sweeping a bare earthen floor, it's a psik reisha that you're going to be mashve gumais. Therefore, that's an issa d'Rabbanan, and therefore we make a gzeira, and we don't allow you to sweep a covered floor onto a non-covered floor. Where geyser merutzef onto eina merutzef. Now the Ramah comes and he qualifies this in two ways. First of all, he says you're allowed to ask an eina Yehudi to go ahead and sweep the floor. Why? Because we're not going to be so makbid that we're not going to aser amir la'akum to sweep a floor where there's no kavanah to be mashve gumais, and even if you are mashve gumais, it's an issa d'Rabbanan of boine kalachayad. We're not going to be so machmer, says the Ramah. And then he says, also, there's a way that you could sweep the floor. And that is you could sweep the floor with some kind of lightweight rag or like with a duster made out of lightweight goose feathers where it's not going to be a psik reisha of mashve gumais. So you have no kavanah to be mashve gumais. It's not a psik reisha to be mashve gumais, and therefore it would be mutter. Okay, where does that bring us when it comes halacha l'maisa? So the truth is, when you do the math, and you take kind of a quick glance at this, I think you would come out, well, klale apsak, at least by Ashkenazim, we usually follow the Ramah. Okay, we have the Ramah, yesh machmirin afilu b'merutzef. So my kitchen floor, if it has ceramic tile, or it has a laminate floor, it sounds like I'm not allowed to sweep it. Now, I mean, we have the counter arguments against muktzah. There's no problem of being mashve gumais. It's a ceramic tile floor. There's no problem of hasiyas gumais. I'm not making holes in the floor. So why on earth can't I sweep the floor? Answer, gzeira merutzef atu eina merutzef. Right? If you would stop over there, l'chari, that's how you would come out. But that's why we must see the Bir Halacha over here. Now, we're not going to go through the entire Bir Halacha. It's a lengthy Bir Halacha. I'm going to jump around in the Bir Halacha. I'll try to give you coordinates in the Bir Halacha so that you could follow. But let's start from the very beginning of this Bir Halacha. Dibra maschel v'yesh machmirin afilu b'merutzef. Says the Chavetz Chaim, I am a Mishnah Berurah cotton test. Take a look at Mishnah Berurah's cotton test. The rationale for this very machmer opinion is mishum degazrinan merutzef atu eina merutzef. The underpinning of this shita that the Ramah brings down is gzeira. It's a very interesting gzeira. We make gzeira on a Rabbanan, but that was the Pri Megadim that we mentioned. But that's the underpinning of this shita, is that we're geyser, that you're not allowed to sweep a covered floor, atu, that you're not allowed to sweep an uncovered floor. Okay. Humi Sefer Truma. This comes from the Truma Sadeshen. The Tikoy Betaz. It's brought down by the Taz. Vihine. Now, says the Chavetz Chaim, Lefize, according to this, Im kol batei ha'ir, if all of the houses in the city, ayal kol panim rubam, or even if the majority of the houses in the city, merutzafim ba'avanim b'levenim, have floors that are covered with some kind of tiles or patio blocks or bricks. So if all, or even roiv, says the Chavetz Chaim, of the houses in the city have floors that are covered over, you generally don't have uncovered floors. Certainly if they're covered with wooden boards, because I mentioned earlier, wooden boards are considered to be even less of a problem than stones. it's very possible that it's mutter to sweep the floor. Why? Deloy gazra ruba mipnei. We don't make a gzera on the majority of the houses in the city. We're not going to aser the majority of the houses in the city that have covered floors to sweep their floors. We're not going to aser that because of the miut, because of the minority of the floors that are uncovered. And certainly if like nowadays, who has an earthen floor? Nobody has an earthen floor. So when you make a gzera that you can't sweep your ceramic tile floor because you might catch one nut somewhere that has an earthen floor, that would be unheard of. Now you'll tell me that the people in Africa, that you should eat your broccoli because the people in Africa are starving. You're going to tell me that they also have earthen floors. I'm sorry. We're not geyser in New York or to Uganda. With all, I'm not going to use the word due respect to somebody who's vying for New York who comes from Uganda. Okay, so we have the opening salvo over here of the Bir Halacha, where he says that very nice that you want to make a gzera merutzif atoein merutzif, but if there's no ein merutzifs around, there's no room for a gzera. If you skip down about 12 lines or so later on in the Bir Halacha, he says ulefizeh. There's no room to be machmir. Now, by me, the second wide line down in the Bir Halacha, he says again, there's no room to be machmir against sweeping the floors if all of the houses in the shtat have covered floors. And then he brings down another matir, and that is if you sweep your house on Erev Shabbos. So by sweeping your house on Erev Shabbos, that's another takedown of any potential problem of asiyas gumais or mashver gumais. It also helps mitigate any issue of muktzah, because you already swept out all the garbage off the floor. V'gam lisa muktzah in lachush, and there's no concern of muktzah, because of the counter arguments that I mentioned earlier. Echad mishum ad kasav harashba, the mutal lefanoisa mishum devik a graf sharei. Any muktzah stuff on the floor has the status of a graf, so you're allowed to get rid of it. It's not muktzah. Void to have a little tiltomayatzadei de davar akalut tzar Shabbos. Those are the counter arguments against muktzah. Couple of lines later, the Mishnah Berurah makes a very important point. Ve'ein lahater el b'machpedes shel anfei tomorrow harakim sherechpafim ve'ein mishtabrim. He does make a point that when we're going to be matter sweeping, it has to be with a broom where the bristles are not going to break. He talks here about a broom made out of very soft palm fronds that will not crack and break, because if you're going to break them when you sweep, you're going to have a problem of breaking a keli. Finally, a few lines further, near the end, he says here, Hayoytze mikol zeh, what comes the conclusion that we reach from all of this is, if all the houses of the city, or at least the majority of them, murutzafim b'kroshim, are covered with boards, and certainly if you already swept out the house on Erev Shabbos, and now you want to sweep out the house with a broom that's not going to break, ein lahachmer, there is no room to be machmer. So in a nutshell, are you allowed to sweep the house on Shabbos? You're allowed to sweep your floors on Shabbos? Yes, you're allowed to sweep your floors on Shabbos. Now, sweeping outdoors, different issue. You have a patio, you could sweep your patio. If you have a patio that has patio blocks and it has sand between the stones, now, I'm not sure about that, and I'll explain to you why. When they do a patio with patio blocks, the way it's done is there's an underlayment of like crushed, there's multiple layers. All the way at the bottom, they have crushed stone. Above that, they have a very, very fine crushed stone, and they sit the patio blocks on that very fine crushed stone, and they set the patio blocks with a little bit of a gap between them. The last step is pouring sand on top of the patio blocks and sweeping the sand into the openings between the patio blocks. Now, really, when you have that type of patio, every few years you're supposed to get sand and put sand out on the patio and sweep it in and refill those gaps between the stones. So now you really have a baina issue. At least in my eyes, you really have a bona fide baina issue. If you sweep that kind of a patio and you're going to end up sweeping sand into the crevices, so it's not even klachayad. They do it with a broom. So it's not klachayad, and it is an improvement, and you want it. So if you have a patio that's constructed in that manner, whether or not you could sweep it on Shabbos, I don't know. We have to declare about such a shaila. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for Limud HaTorah. Discuss of Limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua Sefuras Parnassus Sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the B'Yeskel Tzedek B'mehera v'yameinu Amen. Be well.